I realized that this has been a way more productive thing for me to be able to bring people to Christ than even my own mission was.
Significantly, if I think of in the last 30 years, people that have brought attention to the Book of Mormon, I mean, you're in the top 3. That's some.
This is highly corroborated. There was out of the 12 people that were with the prophet, 6 or 7 of them actually wrote about it in their journal. This is what they said. So he gets up there, they start digging down, and they find, like you said, a skeleton, right? And then this is what is written in the history of the church. It says, the visions of the past being opened to my understanding by the Spirit of the Almighty. So what's going on here? Joseph Smith is having a
Revelation.
He's having a revelation.
We know where it's at today.
Yeah, we can take you there.
Welcome in here to Zion Media, and do we have a treat for you today? Not only am I joined by the whole team, that's right, David the Lion Douglas and Trevor the Keys, but we have a guest for you today, and I know you already see him on there. That's right, Rod Meldrum, the OG, the guy who got a lot of this stuff as it relates to the Heartland started. We have him here on Zion Media. We're so grateful. I had the opportunity to go up to his beautiful home. The view, I can't even describe it. You have to go there to see the view. It was incredible. And we just sat and we talked for several hours. I went and had a Monte Cristo at this really cool diner there in Spring City. And it was just, we had a great time. And we connected, and Rod is literally a lightning rod, like a beacon of light. And I was able to feel his heart and his desire to bring souls to Christ, and how the Book of Mormon has impacted his life. And he told me so many cool stories. And this won't be the first time that we have Rod on, but being that it is the first time, there's a lot of people who know who Rod Meldrum is. There might be some people who don't know who Rod Meldrum is. So to kick this thing off, I just want Rod to go into his story, tell us a little bit about how he got started down this path of the Heartland Model, Book of Mormon evidence, and everything he's got going on. He's got a massive conference that is coming up literally in the next couple of weeks that we're going to talk about and show you how you can get your tickets for that conference. I'm going to be there. David the Lion's going to be there. Trevor Key's is going to be there. And so many other people are going to be there. It's going to be a great gathering, a gathering that you don't want to miss. And the scriptures talk about gatherings. This is one of those gatherings as people that are Latter-day Saints and have the restored truth will gather together, meet each other, and just get to know each other. And since we've gone to 2 hours of church instead of 3 hours of church, you can find more time. You've built up some time, so you should be able to come to this conference and gather with the fellow saints. So with that, Rod, welcome to Zion Media. We're grateful that you're on, and let's jump into your story a little bit, and let's get started with who is Rod Meldrum and how did you get started down this path?
Well, I just wanted to thank you guys for having me on. It's been been great to. I've known David the Lion for quite a long time. He's been coming to our conferences, and he's been kind of the Heartlander over there at Zion Media. So we're grateful for him. But I've been I mean, a lot of people already know my story, and it's really not that important about what my story is particularly. But just I usually start out by just saying I was born at a very young age. And although I did get older in Cass Valley, Utah, I refused to grow up. But I had wonderful parents like Nephi of old. I had fabulous parents who were completely committed to the gospel, and we had we did everything. We did the scripture study, we did family home evening, went through seminary, went through institute, all that kind of thing. served mission in Milan, Italy, and came back. And although I will have to say that on my mission in Milan, Italy, when I came back home, I was pretty proud of myself actually, because I actually was able to double the mission average of baptisms.
Which was?
I had two. So yeah, the average missionary in Italy was having one baptism per mission, and I was able to double that number. But I came home still thinking, gosh, it's kind of pathetic that that I only I mean, the gospel is so important; it needs to go out to so many more people, and the Book of Mormon is really the key to do that. And so I for many years, and because of things in my patriarchal blessing and so forth, I thought, well, I really need to do something more, something better, and that will affect people's lives in a much bigger way. And I can honestly say that the research that I've been involved with the Heartland model geography has been Shane was telling me about some of the different kind of stories of how their podcasts have been affecting people and bringing them, back into activity in the church and back to, wearing their garments, from back to, going back to the temple and so forth. And I was telling them that, for the first about 6 or 7 years of doing this research, I had these big binders, here's one right here, but this like a big 3-inch thick, ring binder. And every time I would get an email or something, I would print it off and I would, punch the holes and I put it in the binder. And after about 8 or 9 of these binders full of kind of testimonials or just how it affected people, I realized that this has been a way more productive thing for me to be able to bring people to Christ than even my own mission was. And so
Significantly, I mean, if I think of in the last 30 years, people that have brought attention to the Book of Mormon, I mean, you're in the top 3. Like that's some.
well, it's not. There's been a lot of people, and actually, I have to give all the credit to the Lord, because He's literally kind of kicked the doors open for us. When we first started this, it was kind of Wayne May was out there. He was kind of the lone voice in the wilderness. You had an awesome podcast with him a few days ago, and he was out there beating the drum of the archaeological information. And I had a couple of friends of mine down in Arizona said, "Hey, Wayne May is coming up to Provo, Utah, to do a presentation. You got to go and check it out." And I said, "Who's Wayne May?"
Right.
So I went to the presentation. He had all these artifacts there, and he let me kind of look at them. I said, "Can I take pictures?" He said, "Oh yeah, just take pictures, whatever." This back in the day when it was a slideshow, and it was literally slides in a projection, in a carousel projector.
What year was this? Do you remember?
This is all no. It was probably in 2007 or 2008,
Okay.
right around there. I had started the research on the Book of Mormon stuff prior to that. I wanted to get a hold of him. Kind of my start had to do with DNA. I was the young man's president of our ward, and there's this young man who was there who was of the age to be going on a mission. For some reason, he wasn't going. I was like, "What the heck is going on with him?" We'd been in campouts together. I knew he had at least somewhat of a testimony. Anyway, long story short is that his family moved out of our ward. We helped him move, and then his mom shows up at my house about 3 days after we helped make the move, and she has this DVD in her hand, and she says, "Well, Brother Meldrum, you do scientific research, right?" And I said, "Well, yeah." She says, "Well, you need to watch this." I looked at it and I recognized it immediately. It was called DNA versus the Book of Mormon. And I saw it, and I knew what it was. I said, "So why do you think I need to watch this?" She says, "Because it's true." And then she proceeded to have her family removed their family removed from the records of the church. But so that became pretty personal for me. And I knew, that, okay, so what a lot of people don't even know what was the whole issue with DNA in the Book of Mormon. And I was at the time, I was like, yeah, how could DNA disprove the Book of Mormon? I mean, it's a 2,000-year-old record. How would it possibly do that? And then I remember going to the April conference in 2002, or yes, that was Yeah, around 2002. And outside the conference center, there was these huge banners that said DNA proves the Book of Mormon is false. And at the time, I was working with Dean Sessions in the Universal Model Project, and I was the senior scientific researcher on that project and had access to some of the top research libraries in the country. So I said, I, you know, the bottom line is I told Shane this and David when they came down, is that I don't need physical evidence to know the Book of Mormon is true, because of what happened to me personally in the MTC. I mean, by the time I went to my mission, I was already, read the Book of Mormon probably a half a dozen times or more myself. And then with my family, probably another 8 or 9 times. And so I knew the Book of Mormon pretty well, but I had an experience there that I wanted to make sure I knew for absolute certainty that the Book of Mormon is true. I'm not going to go and spend 2 years of my life teaching something that I don't know is 100% accurate, 100% true. And so anyway, so I ended up having an experience which was a life-changing experience for me. And I knew the book was true, but because I know the book is true, I know there's going to be evidence because it talks about a highly advanced civilization. It had written language and had, roads and all this kind of stuff. And then, and when I went to, when I was in scripture study with my family, I'd read these passages in the Book of Mormon. Probably you guys have too, about about this mighty Gentile nation above all other nations. Talked about it being a land of liberty, a land of prosperity, a land of security, and so forth. And I just kind of assumed, well, that's talking about the United States. And then I went to seminary and institute, and they said, no, it's down in Central America. It's, that's the Mayan culture down there. That's who it really is. And I said, well, yeah, I'm just a dumb kid. I don't know, but these lot of smarter people than me have figured this out. so I just kind of let it go. But then when this DNA issue came along, basically they started sequencing DNA and the Mayan kings and all the different Central American groups and so forth. And lo and behold, they're all Asian. And I'm like, wait a minute. But Lehi and his family, they're not Asians. They're Hebrews. And Hebrew DNA is it significantly different than Asiatic DNA? And it turns out that, yeah, it is actually quite different. There's certain markers that are in Hebrew populations that are not found in other populations, specifically in Asiatic populations and African populations. So anyway, so long story short, I was at the conference center there, standing outside waiting for this. This is before they had all the protocols that they just put into, or they just barely put in the protocols for the 2002 Olympics for security. Previously, you could just walk right in the conference center, no issues. But after 2002 Winter Olympics, they put in a bunch of scanners and stuff to make sure nobody's bringing in bombs and stuff. Anyway, so that's why we were standing outside for quite a while. I noticed those big signs. I said, there's going to be an answer to this. I don't know what it is right now, but there's going to be an answer. And so that's kind of a little bit of what started me on the path. So I started to do research involving, there was actually a really awesome interview that this German reporter, while he was over here for the Winter Olympics, he went and had an interview with President Hinckley at the time. And he asked President Hinckley the question. He says, so what's going to be your church's position when DNA analysis shows that there's no Hebrew DNA among native populations? And President Hinckley kind of cut the guy off. He said, that hasn't been established yet. Nobody knows the answer to that yet. Not at this point. Turns out that was a prophetic statement. Because a year later in mainstream scientific journals like American Journal of Physical Anthropology and genetics journals and so forth, all of a sudden there began to be these articles coming out that show that they have there's 4 primary, what they call founding groups in the Americas and native peoples, and they were basically haplogroups A, B, C, and D. And haplogroup A was up in the Aleutians up in Alaska. Haplogroup B is the American Southwest, and haplogroup C and D are throughout North and Central and South America. and they're all Asian. But then they started to find among the Algonquin-speaking language groups of North American Indians these 5 markers that are not in Asiatic peoples. In fact, they found that they weren't sure where they were from until later on they started to do DNA research involving like the Druze population over in Israel. And they have these 5 markers that are indicative of the Hebrew, well, basically Caucasian, if you will, or Hebrew people. And then they started finding them in the Ashkenazi Jews and the Sephardic Jews and the Libyan Jews and the Moroccan Jews and the Tunisian Jews and all these different Jewish populations around the world have these 5 markers that are then found, oh my gosh, in the the Ojibwe and the Micmac and the Potawatomis and the Penobscots. And out here in the West, it's like the Sioux and the Cheyenne and the Blackfoot. I was like, whoa, these are Hebrew DNA lineages that they're talking about.
Is this the haplo X?
And this is the haplogroup X DNA type.
Okay.
And so I was like, well, what the heck? And then at the time there was that one of the questions that we talked about the other day is, well, so how did we end up getting this idea that the Book of Mormon happened down in Central America in the first place?
Right.
And after I did the DNA research, then the next thing I wanted to know was, well, what did Joseph Smith have to say about all this? I mean, of all the people, of every prophet or whatever in this dispensation,
Probably
Joseph-
important.
but yeah, well, and he was the only one that actually had, like face-to-face conversations with these guys. We had several of the Book of Mormon people. I thought, well, gosh, was he just clueless about this whole thing? And it turns out that actually, in John Sorensen's book, which is, I've got it right here. This is John Sorensen's book, An Ancient American Setting for the Book of Mormon. Here, he wrote in here on page 3, right here.
Yeah, that thing marked up. I saw those tabs.
It's got all kinds of stuff in it. But this has been like the Holy Grail. This has been like the Bible, the Book of Mormon geography for many years, for probably 35 years or almost 40 years. This book has been out. And at one point, John Sorensen, before he passed away, actually said that they'd had 25,000 copies of this had gone out to members of the church. And when I found that out, I was like, wait a minute, 25,000? Because my first book, my second book, exploring the Book of Mormon America's Heartland, by that time it had 80,000 copies go out, and it was only in 4 or 5 years. So I was a little surprised about that. But this is what he says. He says, the historical sources give no indication that Moroni's instructions to the young Joseph Smith included geography, nor did Joseph Smith claim inspiration on the matter. And we found that is simply not the case.
That's not
Ideas he later
the Doctrine and Covenants.
Yeah. Ideas he later expressed about the location of events reported in the book apparently reflected his own best thinking. So apparently, John Sorensen's opinion is that Joseph Smith was pretty much clueless about it. But then you have his mom, Lucy Mack Smith, in her diary, and she writes down that they would get the family together every evening to have discussions about this stuff, and that Joseph Smith that he knew, that the animals that they had and the laws that they were living under and their origins and their progress and their civilization and so forth. And this he knew as if he had lived among them, right? And the interesting thing about that, she wrote this in her diary before Joseph had even received the plates yet.
Oh.
So where was he getting all this information? I think it's pretty hard to believe that Joseph Smith was left without a clue about where this all happened, when he knew down to the very laws and their origins and where they came from and their progression and where they were. I mean, it's pretty clear that he knew. So,
well, and the debate that you had with who was the guy that you did on that Ward Radio live debate?
Luke.
Yeah. That you laid out just like a shotgun approach of like, Joseph said this, Joseph said this, Joseph said this, just over and over. I was sitting next to David. I'm like, he's murdering him right now. He's just like, I mean, there are so many instances where Joseph clearly, like Camp Zion, when they're walking through in Camp Zion. He's like, we just walked through the plains. I think he's writing Emma at this point, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Tell us some of those. You've got those pretty well.
Man, well, yeah, for a long time, when people said, well, there's been no, inspirational or revelatory thing about, where the Book of Mormon took place. But there's, and it's one thing about, what somebody writes. It's actually kind of another thing. I mean, you can say and do certain things, but what you do tells you really where your heart is at, right? I mean, you can say all kinds of flowery things, whatever, right? But
Actions speak louder than
actions, exactly, Trevor, exactly. And so, so a lot of people said, well, and so, where did the whole Mesoamerica, North America, is it all of the Americas? Like Lance, I love Lance. He's awesome. He's been, and we had an opportunity to spend an entire day together at my house, and we went over some stuff. But a lot of people wonder, well, how do we end up with the Mesoamerica thing? And now it's kind of shifting back over to the, to the Heartland. How did that all happen? And I don't know if you want me to kind of jump into that for just a minute.
Yeah,
or
please.
whatever. But
Yeah.
when the Book of Mormon first came out, there was a couple of people. One of them, and you can actually find all this information out right here in this book. We have it on our bookstore. But it's called The Lost City of Zarahemla, and by Jonathan Neville. And he did the historical research. But see, this is the thing, when Lance and I were getting together, we said, we both have a very common goal. Well, not necessarily a goal, but just, one of the parameters that we think is important. And that is that since Joseph Smith was the only one that had these conversations with the Book of Mormon people, kind of makes sense that we would utilize whatever he said about geography and kind of, not sugarcoat it, just say, this is what he said. And it's been believed. In fact, when I first started doing this research, they said, well, the reason why it's Mesoamerica is because Joseph Smith said so in the Times and Seasons. And I said, well, okay. So I did a deep dive research on the Times and Seasons articles, and found out that many of the time, well, in fact, every time that Joseph Smith, that these articles came out, Joseph Smith was in hiding because somebody taking a pot shot at Governor Boggs, and then they fingered Joseph Smith as the guy, and so they were after him, from a legal standpoint. And so he actually went into hiding a couple of different times, and then there's this guy by the name of Benjamin Winchester. Shane, you remember what I told you about?
Yeah.
He's the smoking gun.
This is probably one of the most fascinating stories that I had never heard before. I don't think Lance had ever heard this either. And it makes a compelling case that I didn't understand when Lance was even citing certain things that Joseph Smith said. So if you would go into that, I think it's a very fascinating thing that I hadn't heard. Maybe you've talked about it on other podcasts, but I had never heard it until I came to your house and you told me the story of Mr. Winchester.
Yeah, and it's all laid out in The Lost City of Zarahemla. Actually, I had it in my first DVD set, which I've got a copy of that right here. And we still have a few of these available. DVDs are like, 8 tracks of our time, kind of thing. But anyway, it's a 5 DVD set. And the second disc was on what Joseph Smith knew about this. And I had gone in and done, a pretty deep dive on this whole thing. And that basically, so what happened was it was in the fall of the year, September, I think it was 1842. There's a couple of articles came out in the Times and Seasons talking about Carigua and Palenque in Central America, and that these are, some of the ruins of the Nephites and so forth. And I was like, whoa, okay, well, I guess there you have it. But the interesting thing is that every one of these articles was written in like third person English, basically, meaning, it was like we and our, we believe that this. I have a whole presentation, but it takes an hour just to do that part of it because it's really in depth. And but anyway, there were some things about that I found out when Joseph Smith was in hiding, these articles were coming out. And then when Joseph Smith found out these articles had come out, he actually took action and actually basically said, I'm not going to be responsible for any articles that come out unless I have my signature on it henceforward. Right. And he actually, that was published in the Times and Seasons. And then about 6 months later, more articles came out in the spring of the year of 1843. And again, pushing this Central America stuff. And when Joseph Smith found out about it this time, he actually fired his brother William and also one of the other guys that was working on the paper, which happened to be Benjamin Winchester. And they published, get this is like publishing this in the Ensign or the Leahona today, they said, Benjamin Winchester is hereby silenced from any further preaching and so forth. Like, whoa, he's getting called out big time, and anyway, but Jonathan Neville was the one that actually figured out that Benjamin Winchester, just a little bit, who is he? His dad and Joseph Smith were like dear friends. I mean, Joseph would stay with them in their home and so forth. I mean, they were, he was the youngest guy on Zion's camp, that you mentioned, Trevor. And he was like 16 years old when he was on Zion's camp. By the time he's 18, he's sent to go on a mission to Europe. He went over, came back pretty quickly, and then he became involved with the church there in Philadelphia. He became, I think he was the bishop of the church actually in Philadelphia at the time. And he was just a missionary guy. I mean, he was just a zealot, man. He wanted to bring the gospel and get the Book of Mormon out to everybody. So he started having these debates with these kind of evangelical people. And these debates, he was doing really well. And people were getting, wow, this is amazing. You got this incredible stuff. And then it came down to the point where they said, well, so now this Book of Mormon talks about this highly advanced civilization. They had a written language and they had, roads and they had cities and they had this and so forth. Who are you talking about? The ignorant savages? Now that term ignorant savages came from, and there's a bunch of information there from Stephen Smoot that he did on the Lost Cities of North America documentary, which is another one that we got so many cool things. Right there, this DVD, The Lost Cities of North America, won the International Cherokee Film Festival Best Documentary of the Year award when it came out.
There's some of those on YouTube right now.
Yeah, and it's 17 scholars in this film, only 3 of which are LDS, and we're not talking about minor leaguers. We're talking about like Dr. Roger Kennedy of the Smithsonian, and we had Dr. Alice Kehoe from Harvard University. So we're talking about big leaguers here. In fact, I pulled this book off my shelf just to see, but this book right here by Dr. Roger Kennedy with the Smithsonian, and it's called Hidden Cities: The Discovery and Loss of Ancient North American Civilization. This guy's not LDS, and he's talking about how these massive cities have just been ignored in North America, and the reason why is because they were made out of wood. They weren't made out of stone. They just disappeared because the wood just falls apart and it's pretty much gone. Anyway, this Benjamin Winchester, he was having these debates and they were saying, well, what about these native people? I mean, we thought they were a bunch of hunter-gatherers, right? Berry and nut hunters. And then about that same time, there was this 2-set book that came out by John Lloyd Stevens and Catherwood. The 2 of those guys had gone down to Central America, and they had gone, romping around in the jungles down there, and they found amazing stuff, right? I mean, these incredible, huge edifices and all kinds of stuff, all covered with jungle and grown over, like they'd been abandoned for centuries. And it was just, man, Americans at the time, they just went crazy over this stuff. In fact, that was the very first ever New York Times best-selling book. They brought it up to New York. They got the books published, printed, and so forth. And then they were selling them, and so Stevens and Catherwood were going up and down the East Coast of the United States doing presentations about this amazing civilization down in Central America. At the same time as this Benjamin Winchester was having these debates with these evangelicals, and they were saying, well, what about these, these Native Americans here in North America, these, these hunter-gatherer people? And when Benjamin Winchester found out about the book, he's like, dang, light bulb, right? He's like, if we could just tie the Book of Mormon to these amazing civilizations and this New York Times bestseller, the first ever New York Times best-selling book set, man, we could take the Book of Mormon to the world. So he became an evangelist for the Mesoamerica stuff. He got the books. He started using that and saying, well, look at, they had rows, they had cities, they had written language, everything that's talked about in the Book of Mormon. They have it all down there in Central America. And he started to prevail again in these debates. Well, so he started a thing called the Gospel Reflector. You guys ever heard of the Gospel Reflector? Not many people have, but it was a publication kind of like the Times and Seasons that Benjamin Winchester started while he was there in Philadelphia. So he started this thing. It's called the Gospel Reflector, and in it he would write articles and would publish them, and then it would go out on the 1st and 15th of each month, just like the Times and Seasons did, and he would send those out. And the interesting thing is that on the Gospel Reflector, in fact, I have the copies of the Gospel Reflector. There's a book with all of them in there. And the subheading on the Gospel Reflector was this interesting phrase. And it said, when God works, who can hinder? Right? That's a pretty unique phrase. And then Jonathan Neville was doing the research on the Lost City of Zarahemla book. He realized that a couple of those very first articles in the Times and Seasons started off with, when God works, who can hinder? It's like, okay, so is that Joseph that's writing this? Or is this Winchester? Because Winchester wrote this previously. And it turns out that Jonathan Neville had figured out that when Joseph Smith was in hiding, the Times and Seasons had subscribers, and they had paid money to get the newspaper, right? And so when Joseph was in hiding, they were like desperate for anything to publish. And so and then there's one other little piece of this. So Benjamin Winchester, basically his Gospel Reflector began to really, it was costing him more money than he was bringing in. He wasn't getting enough subscribers to it. And so he was kind of going broke over there in Philadelphia. And then he heard that Don Carlos Smith, who was working on the Times and Seasons there in Nauvoo, that he had died actually working on the Times and Seasons. It was such a dank hole. I mean, if you've ever been there at Nauvoo, you can see the basement that they were in was probably maybe 15 feet by 15 feet in a hole, right? And no windows. I mean, it was just, it was not good for his health. And bottom line is he passed away. Benjamin Winchester heard about this in Philadelphia, and he wrote a letter, which is still in existence. It's still extant. And he wrote to Joseph Smith and said, hey, I heard that your brother died. So sorry to hear about that. Man, who could possibly replace him on the Times and Seasons?
And
a month later, he shows up in Nauvoo.
Yeah.
So he comes and so he then takes over and is working with Joseph Smith's little brother William, and they were the two of them were doing the Times and Seasons. They also had the Wasp. Have you ever heard of the Wasp? So William started the Wasp, which is another news rag, basically kind of taking on some of the local newspapers that were publishing negative stuff about Joseph and the church and so forth. You know what a wasp does. I mean, it basically stings, right? So William was trying to defend his brother, basically. Anyway, and long story short, basically is that they started off with these articles. These articles literally were written in the Gospel Reflector, and William just was able to take that from Winchester. Winchester got those articles to William. William then put them in the Times and Seasons as if they were Joseph Smith, but they couldn't say it was from Joseph Smith, so there's no Joseph Smith at the bottom of the article. Instead it said ED for editor. So every one of these articles that talk about Central America were just ED, editor, even though in the same issues of the Times and Seasons, there were other articles that were written by Joseph Smith and signed by him as Joseph Smith at the bottom of the article. So why is there this differentiation between ED and Joseph Smith? So so bottom line is that when you look at the whole thing, it turns out that we now can say with I'd say probably 95% for sure, okay, positivity that that the articles in question were in fact not written by Joseph Smith. And when they did come out, then Joseph Smith took action against them. But he never did a retraction. And that's one of the things that, but there's some reasons why they weren't doing retractions at the time. There's only one retraction that's ever been made, I think, in the Times and Seasons. And that was because some kid had snuck into the Times and Seasons. There was a marriage. They had marriage announcements, in the Times and Seasons. And the kid put down or put in print a different name or something like that. Or anyway, it messed up the announcement of the marriage. And so they had a retraction for that. But it also tells you that, they didn't have high security back in those days. People were coming in and out of the Times and Seasons offices. They were trying to get this out that the mail post office in the area was corrupt, and they were stealing the money out of the envelopes coming to pay for their subscriptions at the Times and Seasons. And Times and Seasons was struggling at the time, man. There's a lot of stuff that was going on there. Anyway, that's all in the last City's Zarahemla book. We don't have time to get into details on that, but I'll just say this, and that is that. So let's just say that's the strongest evidence on the Mesoamerica side that Joseph Smith believed the Book of Mormon happened down there. Okay. Now, interestingly enough, though, they talked about Palenque and Carigua in southern Mexico, basically Guatemala. Well, actually, southern Mexico and those. And amazingly, if they were actually the land of Zarahemla, which is what the Times and Seasons article says, that's kind of a problem because neither one of those cities even existed until long after the Book of Mormon timeframes. According to archaeologists, they were about 700 AD, and the Book of Mormon ended at 400 AD. So they couldn't have possibly been Zarahemla. So then that means that if those articles are correct, then Joseph Smith was a false prophet.
Right.
Because
So this is basically like if Shane has to go into hiding, David and I coming out and saying like Zion Media and making statements on Shane's behalf, and Shane meanwhile is on YouTube being like
exactly. It's like Shane is like, he started the Zion Media, right? And so here's Joseph Smith. He starts the Times and Seasons. And so they had this, what they call a boilerplate. This is, back in the day when you had to set the print type, it's a pain in the behind. You have to do everything upside down and backwards, right? And so you do that. And then when you make the what they call the boilerplate, it has, this is like the title page, but it's at the end of each edition of the Times and Seasons. And it says, Joseph is the proprietor. This is the Times and Seasons is edited, written, and blah 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 by Joseph Smith, like he was doing it all himself. And we know for a fact that he wasn't setting the type, he wasn't editing. In fact, he wasn't even editing most of the articles that came out, because he, in fact, says himself that he was surprised by some of the things that came out in the Times and Seasons. Is like
he was hiding on islands on the Mississippi River.
Yes, exactly. So when it came down to that, so that's the strongest information argument there. But on the other hand, we have Joseph Smith claiming revelation in several different areas, where he basically says, for example, when the very first copies of the Book of Mormon just came off, and this is interesting because, okay, who would be more authoritative than Joseph Smith about
Moroni
would be Nephi, because they were there. I mean, they lived in it. But how about we go even one step above all of them? How about the Lord? And how many of you guys, now I'm going to put you on the spot here for a second. How many of you guys believe that the Lord knows who the Lamanites are and where they're located. Raise your hands if you believe the Lord knows. Okay.
Aye.
Okay. All right. And if that's the case, then we have to go into, oh my gosh, if you turn to sections 28 and 30 and 32 in the Doctrine and Covenants.
This is what you were talking about, Shane, right?
Yeah. And this was one of the things that I'm like, oh, that's very, very interesting.
Yes. Because if you go to section 28, and this is actually right in the area where we've been studying right now and Come Follow Me, right? I mean, this
Right.
week is 30 through 36. Okay, so 28 basically, and others for sake of brevity of time, basically, so you have the Lord is calling 4 missionaries, the very first missionaries ever called, with the very first copies of the Book of Mormon that just barely came off the Grandin press. Okay, and this is for you've got it right there. So Oliver Cowdery, go down a few verses there. And Joseph Smith, let's see. Oliver, you're going to go with Joseph Smith, and then you're going to keep going down to right there, verse 8, I think it is. Oh, let's see that just a little bit more. I say unto you, you shall go unto the Lamanites. Now, it's interesting. He didn't say the natives. He didn't say the Indians. He said Lamanites, and preach my gospel unto them, and so forth, right? And then he also talks about the city Zion shall be built. He says, this is a fascinating one because I say unto you that it is not yet revealed, and no man knoweth where the city Zion shall be built, but it shall be given hereafter. Behold, I say unto you that shall be on the borders by the Lamanites. Okay, now this is really a fascinating part of it. Okay. Now, if you go to section 30, for a second, by the way, what's the date on that section, on section 28?
Section 28 is 1830. I mean, September 1830. It's one of the very first
Yep.
sections of the Doctrine and Covenants.
Yeah, that's because they had just finished the translation. Joseph and Oliver had finished the translation. They got the book to the Grandin Press. The very first copies of the Grandin Press were just coming off. And then the Lord basically says, okay, you're going to take these first copies of the Book of Mormon. By the way, I have a couple of them sitting over here in my right over here. I could show you an original one. Anyway, and he and then he sends these missionaries unto the Lamanites. Now, section 30 is for Peter Whitmer Jr. And if you go down to verse, I think it's, let's see, I'm looking at your right now. Keep going down a little bit further. All right, verse 5. Behold, I say unto you, Peter, you shall take your journey with your brother Oliver, for the time has come to open your mouth and declare my gospel. Verse 6. And be ye fulfilled in all his afflictions, ever lifting your heart unto me in prayer and faith. And I have given unto him power to build up my church among the Lamanites. Right? Okay. Now go to section 32. Again, you're with me. We all had our hands up. We all believe that the Lord knows who the Lamanites are and where they're located. So now this is to Parley P. Pratt and Ziba Peterson. And he says, my servant Parley P. Pratt, verse 2, you shall go with my servant Oliver Cowdery and Peter Whitmer Jr. into the wilderness among the Lamanites. And Ziba Peterson also shall go with them. So that's the first 4, but there's actually going to be 5 people on this journey. Who's the 5th one? He says, and Ziba Peterson also shall go with them, and I myself will go with them, and be in their and the advocate with the Father, and nothing shall prevail against them. Dang, does this sound like a personal guided tour by the Lord himself to people that the Lord called Lamanites?
And I will tell you this, for me, and I told Rod this, when I did my family history, when they went and did this, my ancestry through my father's mother, who is Native American, comes from Rebecca Bierce. When they went to the Lamanites, the Native Americans, she was the very first one to get baptized. And so my line runs through Rebecca Bierce because they did what the Lord asked them to do by taking this gospel to the Lamanites.
Now, if you take a look at the date on that last one on section 32, it's like in October. And so they're going, okay, so winter's coming. The weather's going to be awful. Let's just wait till next spring. And instead, Joseph Smith said, here's the first copies of the Book of Mormon. You get your tales out there, you know? And they were in it now. Okay, so one of the most important things. So when I read those, I said, okay, who do they go see? Because I can promise you that whoever they went to go see, when the Lord says, I'm going to go with them and show them who to take these books to, they're Lamanites.
Yeah, where did they go? That was my question.
And that was the question that was burning in my mind. I said, okay, so where did they go? And luckily for us, Parley P. Pratt wrote about this in his journal along the way. And then later on, it was actually published in his autobiography. So we know exactly who it was. Okay. And it turns out that they went to New York, Ohio, and Missouri. They met with 4 specific tribes. And amazingly, when I was doing the DNA research, I went, okay, so they tell us which tribes they are. I said, so, okay, so if that's the tribes and they're the Lamanites, what kind of DNA do they have? And it turns out that these are the exact tribes that have the haplogroup X DNA type that links into every Jewish population on the planet.
That's cool.
And it's the Algonquin-speaking language groups, over 110 Native American tribes that have these 5 markers in them. And it's just fascinating. Now, this is the book that basically I was telling you about earlier. It's called Exploring Mormon America's Heartland. I think David probably has one of these books, but I don't know. They've been out of print for almost 3 years now because Costco we sold them out, and I need to do an updated version of it, and it just takes forever to do these kind of books. But I wanted to share with you just really quickly here.
I was going to ask you, so this isn't on your website? This one's sold out?
This one's sold out. I've got to redo it. In fact, I've been thinking about just republishing it, or maybe even making it as an ebook, because when this happened, oh my gosh, it was when I found out about this, I was just shocked, because it basically said,
It's crazy to think you're sitting on so much gold right there, just that people would be so no.
yeah,
And just to reconfirm what Rod is saying, so when I did the research on Rebecca Bierce, who was the first person to join the church, she's a Wampanoag, and guess what? They speak Algonquin. So
right.
like he's done the research, and this thing lines up. And if you see, I mean, you guys, Trevor, you know my dad. He looks Native American, but he looks like a country club version of a Native American.
Yeah, well, this goes into, I mean, in this book, we have like the Wentworth letter, for example. Let's just show you this. You can see the Wentworth letter basically there. And this is where Joseph Smith, understand that the Wentworth letter, now portions of this actually became canonized scripture, right? The Wentworth letter. And this is what he said. He says, I was informed concerning the aboriginal inhabitants of this country. Well, what country is Joseph Smith in at the time? He's not in Canada. He's not in Mexico, right? He says, and shown who they were, from whence they came, a brief sketch of their origin, their progress, their civilization, their laws, their governments, their righteousness and iniquity, and the blessings of God being finally withdrawn from them as a people were made known unto me. So to say that Joseph Smith was ignorant about this is pretty hard to imagine when that's in the Wentworth letter, right? Yeah. But he goes on. He basically says, that the Indians are the people who now inhabit this country. Okay. There's also the American Revivalist account, which is right here, American Revivalist account. Now, this is a letter that the American Revivalist and Rochester Observer, which is a newspaper there in Rochester. And they were, there was all this, scuttlebutt going on about what Joseph Smith was doing, this gold Bible and all this kind of thing. So they actually asked him to write kind of an introduction to the church, at the time. It was 1833. He penned this letter to them. And he said, and in this letter, he writes, and interesting. So he writes this letter, he sends it to the publisher. They edit it down to just, a couple of paragraphs. And then it's published. And then Joseph Smith catches word that they published that they edit it way down, right? And he shot back a letter basically saying, that letter that I sent you was written by commandment from God. Do not change one word of it. And amazingly, the editor actually put the entire thing in next time, the entire letter. This is a part of the letter that Joseph Smith said that God told him to do. He said, the Book of Mormon is a record of the forefathers of our Western tribes of Indians.
Well,
Now, if you're in New York and you go west, how far west do you have to go to get to Guatemala?
yeah, or to Mexico.
You can't get there by going west, right?
Yeah.
You have to go south at some point. He says, by it we learned that our Western tribes of Indians are descendants from that Joseph that was sold into Egypt, and that the land of America, and it's singular, he didn't say the Americas, he said the land of America is a promised land unto them. That's from Documented History of the Church. The editor, Mr. N.E. Seaton, published a portion of the letter from Joseph Smith in his article entitled Mormonism in the paper on the 2nd of February of 1833. 10 days later, Joseph Smith penned another letter indicating his disappointment as having received the letter and finding his original letter had not been printed in its entirety. Joseph Smith's response to Seaton was recorded in the History of the Church, February 12th, as follows. To N.E. Seaton, Rochester. Dear sir, I was somewhat disappointed on receiving my paper with only a part of my letter inserted in it. The letter which I wrote you for publication, I wrote by the commandment of God, and I am quite anxious to have it all laid before the public, for it is of importance to them. I now say unto you that if you wish to clear your garments from the blood of your readers, I exhort you to publish this letter entire, but if not, the sin be upon your head.
Jeez.
Okay, so yeah, that's it. Yeah, then you got Lucy Mack Smith and her talking about how he would talk about all this stuff before he was even had the plates. Then you have Zelph's mound, and you guys all know about Zelph. David, you want to tell us about Zelph? you're the Heartlander guy, but
Yeah, I think a lot of our viewers, I don't know, I'd love to say that they know about Zelph's Mound too, but basically Joseph was on Zion's camp. He was marching with the select brethren that we're gonna be in the future, the 12. And on the trip they stopped because Joseph actually, I'm not sure how exactly he dawned on it, but they took a break, and Kel's made a really great series on this with the
it feels good, man. Awesome. Yeah.
yeah. So he basically stops and sees some remains of a person that was there, and he picks up a skull and finds, I think, maybe even a grave site, and receives revelation that this area was of a prophet named Onodagus, and there was a guard named Zelph that was protecting this prophet Onodagus. And so that's what I thought about.
A white Lamanite prophet is what it's
Interesting. Yeah, it really is fascinating. But the whole event, basically, they crossed over the Illinois River onto the west side, and then the next morning, Joseph and about 12 brethren went up on this, kind of like a little. They went for a walkabout.
Is this in Illinois River?
This is, so this is in actually Illinois, on the west side of the Illinois River, there by Griggsville. If you want to go there today, it's by Griggsville, Illinois. But basically, I was going to just read you what David was just saying here, because amazingly, so they went to this place, and then this is highly corroborated. There was like, out of the 12 people that were with the prophet, like 6 or 7 of them actually wrote about it in their journals, including Levi Hancock and John Taylor and Wilford Woodruff, future prophets of the church. They wrote about this in their journals. And this is what they said. Now, this is actually comes from History of the Church, Volume 2, pages 79 through 80, June 3rd, 1834. This is the 1848 edition. So Joseph Smith basically came up on this mound. He started having some peculiar feelings come over him, okay? And he basically asked the guys, does anybody have a shovel? So they get a shovel, and they start digging down into the top of this mound. Now, the mound today sits at about, it's probably about 30 feet tall, about probably 75 feet or 80 feet long and about 25 or 30 feet wide.
We know where it's at today.
Yeah, we can take you there. You can see it. It's actually
Oh,
archaeologically.
Are you saying that I gave the coloring book version, and you're like about to go into more detail?
No. I just wanted to have the direct quote from Joseph Smith. No, you pretty much nailed it, though. I mean, their Zion's camp. I mean, everything you said was accurate. But this is the interesting thing about this is so they got the so he gets up there, they start digging down, and they find, like you said, a skeleton, right? And then this is what is written in the history of the church. It says, the visions of the past being opened to my understanding by the Spirit of the Almighty. So what's going on here? Joseph Smith is having a
revelation.
He's having a revelation. Okay. And it's not somebody else claiming it. It's Joseph Smith claiming this. He says, I discovered that the person whose skeleton was before us was a white Lamanite, a large, thick-set man, and a man of God. His name was Zelph. He was a warrior and a chieftain under the great prophet Onondagas, which is, you mentioned that, who was known from the hill Cumorah or Eastern Sea to the Rocky Mountains. Hill Cumorah, we know where that is.
Yeah.
It's in New York.
Right.
To the Rocky Mountains. That means the space between the Rocky Mountains and the hill Cumorah is where he said that they served. He says he was killed in battle by the arrow found among his ribs during the last great struggle with the Lamanites and the Nephites. So they found this arrowhead in the rib cage of this guy. And so they now Elder Burr Riggs actually ended up taking the arrowhead. Later on he got it to Brigham Young, who actually put it into the First Presidency vault. And then a friend of mine, that James Allen, that he wrote the book called the Eternal Perspective of Zion's Camp. Awesome book. When he was doing the research on it, they let him. He went up to the church office building, and they actually let him look at the arrowhead. They pulled it out of the First Presidency vault and had him, and he was able to take photographs of it on a ruler, so you can see exactly how big it is and everything. And while they weren't looking, he maybe should I grab it for you?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, grab it.
It's just right here. Yeah, I'll just grab it.
So when I went to his house, like he has a whole setup there for presentations, podcasting. It's like a studio in and of itself, like really cool stuff and artifacts literally all over the place.
Does he have any brass artifacts?
We
I got copper ones. I don't have any brass ones.
That's what I meant. Copper is what I meant. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got copper ones. Yeah, for sure. Because they're
Copper was we should do a tour. That'd be really great.
There we go.
Look at that.
That's cool.
Whoa, that's
Okay.
pretty
Let me
preserved.
see if you can hold it up there. Okay, now this is a replica. Okay. I know I had to go on for a second there about the but based on the photographs that were taken by him, he this friend of mine by the name of Charles Allen, he was known as the window maker. He's the guy that handmade all the windows and doors for the Nabu Temple restoration. But anyway, long story short is that he had a couple of flint knappers actually make it. It was made out of black Yellowstone obsidian. So actually the obsidian came out of Yellowstone. We know that for sure because it's very unique, and so forth. And so it came out of Yellowstone area. So we know they were out here in the West as well. And anyway, so that was, it's like, wow, okay. So, so Joseph Smith had this vision, and he said that this guy was between the Rocky Mountains and the thing. Interestingly enough, archaeologically speaking, that the mound is called Russell's Naple Mound number 8. There in Missouri. It's actually an archaeological site. And they did some digs on that a few years back, probably about 10 to 12 years back. And they actually found Native American artifacts, several other bodies. Now, Zelph was buried on the top of it. So this mound actually had existed prior to Zelph dying. They didn't have time in the final battles to actually build these massive mounds like that. This was something that was built previously, and they basically did what they call an intrusive burial into that. Anyway, so I just got to share with you, because after that, So if Joseph Smith was faking this stuff, it's kind of interesting because the archaeologists, they found a couple of other burials. They found artifacts in it, and guess who the people are that made the artifacts? It's the Hopewell mound builders.
Of course.
It's the Hopewell mound builders. That's the artifacts that came out of the mound. There was some pipes, some effigy pipes. There was about 3 or 4 copper axe heads that were found, and so forth there. And when they did the dating on it, amazingly, it comes out to about it said 250 AD plus or minus 100 years. If you plus 100 years, that's 350 AD. That's just a little bit early of the final battles, but again, this is carbon dating. It's not, it's not 100% accurate. I mean, it could be off by 15 to 20 years easily. And so basically, not only did Joseph Smith get it right as far as the dating, right, of when this guy was killed, but he also got the area right. Now, so there's all this different stuff. So one other little interesting thing from Joseph Smith's life, basically, and that has to do with when they were on a different camp, and they went down through Adamantiaman, and there Joseph Smith identified a Nephite altar. You remember that?
Uh-uh.
A Nephite altar at Adamantiaman. Okay.
Yeah, I remember that.
There's also there was an Adamic altar as well, but there's a Nephite altar, and if there's a Nephite altar there, it's a pretty good bet that there were Nephites there.
What made it identified as a Nephite?
Well, Joseph Smith just said that was something that there was just rocks strewn across the ground. In fact, even on Zelph's mound, one or two of the accounts actually talk about that there was a bunch of rocks that had been kind of thrown down, that looked like it was a set like an altar. So there was an altar on Zelph's mound as well. Those rocks have since been hauled off. But people say, well, okay, but that was that's clear back in 1834, right? By 1842 and 1843 is when these articles about Mesoamerica started coming out. So clearly Joseph Smith changed his mind from his earlier revelations about North America being the setting for the Book of Mormon. And now he was kind of changing his mind, because of this New York Times best-selling book and so forth. And so now he's kind of embracing Central America, right? So that was an argument that was being made. I said, well, I mean, people who change their mind, but how do you go back and change what you said was a revelation?
Right.
When you said something was a revelation and it came from God, it's kind of problematic if you go back and say, well, that's not really what I meant.
Right.
Yeah, that's not a good plan. So I wanted to find out, okay, so you have these sections 28 and 30 and 32 in the Doctrine and Covenants talking about the missionaries going to the Lamanites. And then I had a friend from my dear friend, Andrew Ehat. Andrew Ehat is a church historian extraordinaire. In fact, probably all of you and most people in the church know about the Teachings of the Prophet Joseph Smith by Joseph Fielding Smith.
The Blueberry.
Great book, but unfortunately, about 30% of everything that's in that book cannot be directly attributed to Joseph Smith.
Come on.
Yeah. That's the reason why you go to like the Joseph Smith Papers Project. Okay, they have been the most accurate by far as to what stuff was really Joseph Smith and what stuff wasn't. So Andrew Ehat has a book called The Writings of the Prophet Joseph Smith, and all of those are historically verified. Now, Joseph Smith didn't write everything, right? He usually used scribes, okay? But when it's definitely Joseph Smith and he was using a scribe or writing himself, then we have this. And he called me up one day, says, Rod, he says, I got something for you. I said, what? He says, the idea that Joseph Smith changed his mind, he says, listen to this. Okay. So he pulled up Joseph Smith's his diary, or basically his journal, right? Now the first time that in 1841, late the summer of 1841, this is the visit of the Sac and the Fox Indians. Okay. And so the Sac and the Fox Indians visit.
That looks like a country club Indian, Shane. Look at that picture. That
really
guy's like high class.
He's definitely high class. Not only that, but guess what? He's got on his head a turban.
A turban.
Yeah, the Native Americans in the eastern part of the United States, most of them wore turbans, or what we considered like a throwback to turbans. All right, anyway, so late in the summer of 1841, a group of Native Americans of the Sac and Fox tribes came to visit Joseph Smith. They had been displaced from their homelands in Michigan, were now west of Mississippi in the present-day Iowa and Missouri. The meeting was recorded in the history of the church. Joseph writes of this meeting on August the 12th of 1841. He says, Thursday, the 12th, a considerable number of Sac and Fox Indians have been for several days encamped in the neighborhood of Montrose. And Montrose is across the river from Nauvoo. Okay. The ferrymen brought over a great number on a ferry boat and 2 flatboats for the purpose of visiting with me. The military band and the detachment of Invincibles, that's part of the Nauvoo Legion, were on shore ready to receive and escort them to the grove. But they refused to come on shore until I went down, and accordingly went down and met Keokuk, Kikakush, Apanus, and 100 chiefs and braves of those tribes with their families. I think it's interesting it said that with their families, they brought their women and children with them, apparently. Let's see. We see them, went down. Okay. At the landing, I was instructed by Brother Hiram I was introduced by Brother Hiram to them, and after salutations, I conducted them to the meeting grounds in the grove, and instructed them in many things which the Lord had revealed unto me concerning their fathers. Is Joseph Smith saying revelation again here?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he says it was revealed to him concerning their fathers and the promises that were made concerning them in the Book of Mormon. He's directly linking these people,
Their
right,
ancestors to the Book of Mormon. Yeah.
to the Book of Mormon. It says, I advise them to cease killing each other and warring with other tribes, and to keep peace with the whites, all of which was interpreted to them. Okay, so that was in 1841, but then these articles came out in 1842 and 1843 about Central America. And this is the one that Andrew E. had then. He said, Rod, I think you're going to like this. This is important. So he says, this is Thursday, May the 23rd, 1844. So let's see. Did Joseph Smith change his mind? This is just a month before his
Right before he dies. Yeah.
Yeah. So just a month before he's dead, right? Before he's assassinated. Now, technically, it wasn't just a murder. It was an assassination because he was running for president at the time. He says, in May of 1844, a month before his death, the prophet records another visit by the same Sac and the Fox people in his personal journal, when he again restates what the Lord told him years before about these people. This is a direct quote. 1 p.m., held council with the Indians, the Sac and the Fox in my back kitchen. They told me, you are a big chief. You preach a great deal, so says the Spirit. I replied, Great Spirit wants you to be united and live in peace. I found a book, presented with a copy of the Book of Mormon, which told me about your fathers, and the Great Spirit told me.
Wow.
You must send to all the tribes you can and tell them to live in peace. And when any of our people come to see you, treat them as we treat you. The Native Americans were treated well by Joseph Smith. In fact, that's one of the things that he wanted to have as president. He wanted to bring in the Native peoples more closely into the United States.
Hey, Rod, can you?
And it was just awesome. Yeah.
I have a question that's come into my mind.
Yes.
So I have my Book of Mormon here, and in the Book of Mormon I have, it says written to the Lamanites. And it, in the older versions, it was very specific to the Native Americans, and it feels like they've shifted that. They've changed that as new Book of Mormons come out. Do you have any thoughts or insights why the church has kind of changed the introduction to the Book of Mormon to be less about the Native Americans, where in the beginning it was? I grew up always thinking that the ancestors of the Book of Mormon are the American Indians. Like, even on my mission in 1999, that's what I was telling people in South Africa. I just like that makes the most sense in my own mind. And the Book of Mormon certainly talks about the promised land being the United States of America, not the American continent necessarily, but literally the promised land being right here. Like that's how I read the Book of Mormon. Like that's how I see it. I've always seen it that way. And it feels like to me maybe there's been a little pullback from where that was with Joseph Smith and what we're experiencing today. Maybe is that just the learned people deciding that they need to put their stamp on it, or what would you say is going on there?
Well, I tell you what's going on is that it wasn't 100% clear, even though Joseph Smith said these things, and like I said, I've even thought that this goes above Joseph Smith's head when the Lord basically says, "I'm going to take you on this trip, this tour, and I'm going to take you to the Lamanites," and then he went to these particular tribes. That was a pretty important thing. But then some people were saying, okay, and this goes into, man, this is an awesome part of this whole thing too. But it has to do with people saying North and South America was the promised land. In other words, the entire continent. And at first, I have no problem with that, if that's the case. But there's several things. Number one is that it talks about in the Book of Mormon that there would come a day when there would be a new nation that would be established, lifted up, raised up, etc. And they talk about this nation being a mighty Gentile nation above all other nations, which means it's among other nations, right? So it's not talking about North and South America. And then it talks about how it'd be a land of liberty, a land of prosperity, a land of security. And that's actually the very first book that I ever did was actually this book called Prophecies and Promises with Bruce Porter. That's this book right here, Prophecies and Promises, the Book of Mormon in the United States of America. And they're basically just going into the details about that. It turns out that there's 36 prophecies in the Book of Mormon about a Latter-day nation that was going to be established. And there's 18 of those prophecies. Half of the prophecies are about the people who are going to be on this land of promise, and the other half is about the land itself. And actually, in this book, I have those all kind of listed out. And essentially, as you go through this, you realize that the only nation that can qualify in all 36 of these prophecies is the United States. And it's not that we're trying to be rah-rah USA. The fact is that's what God said.
It's just what the book says. Like, let's just take the book for what it said. And that's how I thought everybody saw it that way, because that's just what the book says. I'm just reading what the book says. I'm not trying to make anything up. I'm just saying this is what the book says.
James, I did an interesting experiment with my GPT. I asked it, I said, based off of what you understand of the Book of Mormon, what country is it talking about? And it obviously said, North America, or, it said America, and United States of America. And I said, why? I said, give me, like 10 points where it says that. And it just spits them out like that fast.
Yeah.
So even ChatGPT thinks it.
It is clear. And that's why I get confused. Like, why have we pulled back from the Native Americans as being the principal and primary ancestors of the Book of Mormon? And it feels like we pulled back from that position. And I don't know if they're afraid about DNA or they're whatever it is, but I just am like, let's just go on what the book says and what the guy who translated the book believed, and what the scriptures that we say we believe in, like Doctrine and Covenants section 28 and Doctrine and Covenants section 30, which you pointed out for me. And thank you for doing that, because I've read that, but now you gave me new eyes, and now I'm going like, okay, it's clear here what is happening here.
All right, Trevor, you want to
yeah, this is the theory. I don't know. I'm just spitballing here, but I feel like I went to my mission in Peru, right? And I feel like we've done a really good job baptizing Latinos, right? And because of that, we've failed miserably converting Native Americans as a church, right? And so maybe there's a little bit of that, Shane. Maybe it's like, hey, we've done such a bad job. Let's move the goalposts a little bit and expand it to the whole entire, I don't know. That's a thought.
Well, let me tell you that's one of the reasons why the DNA research became so important. Because the bottom line is that in the Doctrine and Covenants, I think it's in section 3, towards the end of that section, it says that the reason why the gold plates were preserved in the first place were so that the prophecies and the promises would be made known. Is it possible we can actually learn more about the where of the Book of Mormon through a study of the prophecies than we can by speculations about narrow necks of land and narrow passages and whether it snows or not and all that kind of stuff, right? And so the bottom line is that there were people who believe that Joseph Smith, and I was kind of getting into this, Shane, for just a second. This is going to be important because the idea that it happened in North and South America stems from in fact, I could even bring it up and show you, a little bit more information about this. This is pretty fascinating stuff. Or I could just tell you
on your website.
Parts of it are probably on the website, but I have actually a presentation about this, about Joseph Smith. I'll just bring it up here. I've got it on a different computer here, so let me just pull it up real quickly. Well, no, I'm just going to tell you what it is. It'd take too long.
Yeah, just tell us.
So Joseph Smith is having a conference report. Or he's doing a general conference talk. And he basically said this: all of America is Zion itself, north and south. Now, some of the people, that's what the actual people who were there and wrote it down, they were writing this down. That's what they said. Some people then assumed that all of America, north and south, means all of North and South America. But what's fascinating is that if you go back and you look at the time when this actually happened, when this conference actually was happening, it's right after Joseph Smith had just had this new revelation about the coming Civil War, when the South was going to be rising against the North in America, right? And then I have several examples where Joseph Smith uses the term America. And he says America is trying the experiment of a free government. Well, clearly he's not talking about North and Central and South America. It's not all the Americas he's talking about. When Joseph Smith uses the term America, it's absolutely clear he means the United States of America.
Right.
And so when he says all of America is Zion itself, North and South, what he means is the Confederacy and the Union, and he just had this revelation that they're about to have a huge civil war, right? And so that's what he's talking about. So people misunderstood that as all of North and South America is Zion. It isn't. At least if Joseph Smith is correct. Okay. And so we can show you that when Joseph Smith uses the term America, he means the United States of America, just like today. I mean, if you're in Australia, I was just in Australia recently, right? And you say, hey, I'm going back to America. Nobody assumes you're going to go back to Brazil, right? You're coming back to America. You're going to be coming back to the United States. In fact, even if you look up in Wikipedia, it says the Americas is all of North and South America, but America has become, well, I hate to say it, kind of like the Gulf of America. Okay, it's kind of like, it's one of those things that it's not the Americas. So back to your question, Shane. So why did we get off on this wrong foot for so long? And what's been going on? And that has to do with Benjamin Winchester, the times and seasons. Then things kind of started falling apart. They went, everybody ended up having to migrate out to the great desert valley of Salt Lake and so forth. And kind of, Brigham Young took up the mantle, and it kind of became just not really a thing for a lot of years. And then there's actually a group of people who were actually, ultimately they became the RLDS church back then, which is now the Community of Christ, but it was the RLDS church. And they began to really look at this. And then you guys remember Willard Bean?
Mm-hmm.
Willard Bean, the fighting preacher. Okay. When he was sent back with his family to Palmyra to kind of make reparations or whatever, kind of patch up things a little bit with the people of Palmyra. And he ended up being able to get the Hill Cumorah. And when the church was able to actually finally purchase the Hill Cumorah in New York, the RLDS church basically said, well, dang it. They said, they beat us to it. And then they had some of their scholars actually came out and started saying, hey, you know what? That's okay. The Salt Lake Church, they bought the wrong hill. The real hill Cumorah is down in Central America someplace.
Oh, really?
That's
They screwed up, right? See? And so
wow.
they started the promotion of this Central America stuff, which then ended up, and everybody kind of know this is like not a shot against Lance in any way, shape, or form. But bottom line is that the idea that the Book of Mormon happened in North, Central, and South America wasn't a new idea. Everybody looked at that. They said, hey, there's a narrow neck of land. All you got to do is just take a look at North America is here, South America is here. What's in between this narrow neck of land, right? Like Panama, right? Only problem is in the Book of Mormon, they said that they could cross the narrow neck of land on foot in a day. And another time it says it was a day and a half for a Nephite to cross the narrow neck. Well, nobody's crossing Panama and the swamps and so forth down there in a day and a half. There's no way that that's the narrow neck of land. And so then people started looking at it. And I was going to show you this. Well, let's see. Let me answer Shane's question here first. So basically, how did it get to be all of North, Central, and South America? That came from that speech that Joseph Smith had recorded in the church history, where he says all of America, North and South, is Zion. That's why all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay. And then plus you have Benjamin Winchester, and they're talking about, Central America and the times and seasons. Joseph Smith talking about Zelph and all this kind of stuff up here in North America. So, okay, it's got to be North and South America. But the problem is that the Book of Mormon has a limiting factor. I call it a scriptural limiting factor. That is, it's a nation. It's a nation that was going to be raised up by men that God would actually preserve for that very purpose. For the Constitution. If you
maybe, sorry to get you off, I have to say this. Maybe Trump needs to take over Canada and Mexico to fulfill the prophecy of the Book of Mormon.
Okay. Well, and people have said that. Well, now wait a minute. So, Rod, are you talking about like when the 13 colonies, or was it after the Louisiana Purchase, or was it after the Northwest Territories Purchase? I mean, at what point did America become, that nation? And my answer has been, I think God knows what the United States was going to become.
Sure.
So it was just there. Also, I mean, there's so many other things like in that statement where Joseph Smith said all of America is Zion, North and South. He also talks about independence as the center place. Now, in Joseph Smith's day, independence is the center place. Joseph Smith had been scratching his head going,
yeah, that's far west. I mean,
that's as far west
territories.
You go a little bit further than that, you're like in Mexican territory, right?
Right.
So when the Lord says independence is the center place, he's got to be thinking, well, that's just weird. But if you take a look at independence today, it literally is in the center of the United States. It's geographically, it's in the center of the United States. So if the United States is the promised land, and by the way, just in case anybody was wondering, Elder L. Tom Perry, an apostle that passed away just about 3 or 4 years ago, he actually got a copy of my book for Christmas in 2011. And I had a friend of his actually gave it to him, and he had me write a nice forward, not forward, but, I'd sign it and whatever on the inside of it. 2 months later, he goes up to BYU, Idaho, and delivers this amazing address, which is published in December of 2012 in the Ensign. And in it, he basically says, and this is a direct quote, the United States is the promised land foretold in the Book of Mormon, which when you consider, I still haven't answered Shane's question yet. Let me just do that really quickly, and then we'll go back to the quote, okay? So bottom line is that if all of North, Central, and South America is the Nephites, or the remnant Lamanites, then in the introduction of the Book of Mormon, it said that the Native Americans are the principal ancestors, or excuse me, the Native Americans are the principal ancestors of the Book of Mormon, right? That was changed back in 1982 or 3 or something like that when they changed it. No, excuse me, it was 2000 and something. Anyways, right after the DNA research had started coming out, and they realized that not everybody here that are Native peoples are from the Book of Mormon. There's been other migrations, and specifically Asiatic migrations that have come over here that had nothing to do with the Book of Mormon, but they're here. And were they brought here by the Lord? Well, probably, but that doesn't make them, Lamanites as far as that's concerned. And so, that's when that kind of that introduction was changed to they are among the Native Americans. In other words, Native Americans are among the ancestors. So what they're saying is not everybody that was native here in the Americas is a direct descendant of Lehi and his family, which makes perfect sense.
So DNA.
So that's where the DNA comes in. Yes. Because the DNA shows that they were the Mayan civilization and the Aztecs, the Toltecs, the Olmecs, all of those civilizations in Central and South America are 100% Asiatic people. They have the markers that come from Asia. If you take a look even at the temples, for example, like Tikal and Chichen Itza and some of these temples, and you go over to East Asia, like Cambodia and Laos and so forth, and you look at the temples there, like Angkor Wat and other, of these amazing temples, every one of them, they're square based. They go extremely steep sided, right?
Yeah.
It's because of the same people. It's the same temples. It's the same, even the cartouche, not the cartouches, but the writing system that they have over in East Asia looks like the stuff that the Mayans have in Central America. The writing systems are even very similar. Okay. Basically there's even non-LDS people that said it's called, they call it Hindu America because there's so much Hinduism in Mesoamerica that there's even, Wayne May actually found this book. It's called Hindu America. These scholars basically saying, you look at the temples, they're the same deal. You look at their religion, it's the same deal.
Graham Hancock is talking about that. A lot of these guys are talking about. So Rod, Shane and I have a Babylon break that we need to get to, but we want to talk about your conference because it's coming up soon. And David, let's get the website
a week from now. Let me just show you that to just tell you a little bit about that. So as far as conferences are concerned, it's so awesome because the Mesoamerica guys. I don't know if I should have you guys be the ones that be the first ones out with this or not. Maybe. Should we? You guys want to be the
break it here?
Okay. So back to let me just finish the one thing with Elder. He said the United States is the promised land foretold in the Book of Mormon. Okay. That was so awesome that he did that. Okay, let's go back to this for just a second. So, all right, so much stuff. Oh my goodness.
So we have so many more future podcasts we need to do with you because there is so much, and trying to keep it within. We try to keep our podcast around an hour and 30 minutes.
Yeah,
trust me, we're gonna have Rod on again and again and again. I could spend deep. I could prop other hours at his house. Yeah, it was just incredible.
Maybe we could have you come back and share the rest of that story, and unless you're down to share.
That's fine. Yeah, I got the feeling that we need to, that there's going to be a lot of people going to have a very big interest in this because the bottom line is that the Mesoamerica thing, for many years it was kind of held sway. I mean, it was actually taught by CES and so forth, but they stopped doing that. They actually had a thing that they sent out to all the CES teachers and so forth, said no more promoting Mesoamerica.
Really?
Like, we're gonna be neutral. We got to be neutral. And so but one of the other things I'm going to mention about lands, and that is that the idea of it being all of North, Central, and South America, basically a hemispheric model, was pretty much rejected way back in the early days. Because when you take a look at the movements, in fact, this is kind of funny because Lance showed when he was like 14 years old, he made his first, to make a geography map of the Book of Mormon, right? This was I wasn't 14 at the time. But this basically, I don't know if you can see that or not.
A little higher.
Right there. Okay.
Yeah.
So this is actually a word. Actually, it's an Excel document that I did. I was probably about 24 at the time. This is pretty old because that was a long time ago for me. But in there, I wanted to do the same thing as Lance did. And basically, so I took every every city, like for example, if you take a look right here, this is the city of Zarahemla. Let's see if you can see right there. So Zarahemla, okay. And then each column represents the first time it was actually the first recorded appearance in the Book of Mormon. So it was 87 BC is the first time that the word Zarahemla shows up in Alma chapter 2. The last time it shows up is about 130 BC in Omni chapter 1 verse 12. Then the last recorded appearance is between AD 321 and 326, which is Mormon 110. Any information about this city, like in this case, it was destroyed by fire in AD 33. It was rebuilt in AD 35 to 321. Any cities and lands that are in the general area with notes about that. Any cities and lands that are around borders or shores or whatever. Any cities or lands that are to the north, to the south, to the east, or to the west. So if there's anything that's mentioned in those directions on that city, now that's Zarahemla. Then if you go through this, I'll just say that basically every geographical city that's mentioned or place, including the River Sidon, like the Nephi, Lehi, Shemlon, Mormon, Amulon, Helam, Shilem, Ishmael, Desolation.
Mouth in your blood.
It's all there with every reference, so I could actually quickly go to it and say, well, it says here that for example, here anti-Nephi Lehi, that cities that were close to it was Ishmael and Zarahemla. River Sidon, that's another one we have a good discussion on. River Sidon, okay. East Wilderness, the West Wilderness, narrow strip of land, east, sea west, Jershon, Jerusalem, Midoni, Lemuel. Anyway, so you can see, page after page after page, Melech.
We need to have a discussion, not a debate, but just a discussion, because Lance has all his stuff and Rod's got all his stuff, and to have a discussion would be very interesting, because I think between everybody we could maybe find the actual truth. And I'm the guy that's on the fence. I'm like, oh, that sounds like that could be right. Oh, that sounds like that could be right. And so I'm just learning all this stuff for the first time. Now we have got Trevor and I have unfortunately we have a regular job. I want to schedule another call. Again, this is so fascinating. Like, to me, this is so fascinating. And I want you to know, we appreciate you taking almost an hour and 45 minutes with us. And it was like the fastest hour and 45 minutes of my life. That's what tells me this is interesting. People are interested in this. And I also understand that it's important for people to have this information, because it allows them to see the Book of Mormon in a completely new light, in a completely new way. And I know that the desire of Rod's heart is to share this Book of Mormon evidence. And we want to make sure that we promote and plug and let people know of the Book of Mormon Evidence Conference. Tell us when it is. Tell everybody how they can get their tickets, and that they need to go and get them now, because tickets are going fast. You're probably almost sold out at this point.
Yeah, we've got a bigger, last time, the biggest one we ever did was actually the Davis County Convention Center. We had 7,500 attendees and like 90 presenters, over 140 classes.
Sounds like
Now we've got the streaming website, so people don't have to come specifically to the conference. They can actually see the conference on the streaming website within about 3 or 4 weeks after it's done. But a lot of people still like to come because it's just an awesome event. So we've got, for example,
the networking of these things makes it worth its money. That alone.
It is just phenomenal. So it's actually April the 17th, 18th, and 19th. That's Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. It's from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. It's a long day, but we've got amazing speakers. We've got Troy Abels, we got Jennifer. You guys are coming. We got Cardinellis coming with Ward Radio. We've got Gracia Jones. We got Joseph Smith. Descendants are coming. David Alexander, and then we have a bunch of regulars. Now, also Wayne May has one coming up in June, right? And he's got, I think, 10 or 12 individuals. Most of them have spoken before at our conferences, and so there's only I think there's a couple of them that I've never heard of before, but most of them have spoken at our conference before. So we have those, a lot of those on our streaming website. But encourage people to go to Wayne's as well. The more information, the better, right? You can scroll up just a little bit.
So this is, just to be clear, this is the 19th, which is a week from Saturday. We're going to air this pretty soon.
Yeah.
And to get tickets, go to bookofmormonevidence.com. How much are tickets for the event?
So yeah, if you scroll down just a little bit more there,
You need to scroll. I think
David, scroll
you're sharing
just a little bit.
screen. Whoever's sharing screen needs to scroll.
No, let's see. Okay. Sorry. Okay. Let me get this. Let's see. Why is this not scrolling here? Okay. Well, let me see here.
Just click in the browser, click on the page, and you should be able to scroll. If not, then you could.
Okay.
It's okay. It's 3 days. Go to bookofmormonevidence.com. Get your tickets. Listen,
Yeah.
the Zion Media boys or bros, however people are calling us, we'll be there. We'd love to meet people. We think this is a great way for us to gather together as saints, meet each other, and just enjoy so many of these amazing speakers. I saw David Alexander. We had him on our podcast. Amazing.
Yeah.
Cardin Ellis will be there. Amazing. There's so many good
David
people that we're
Douglas
going-
will be there. People
David
pay just to
Douglas,
go
yeah.
meet David Douglas.
Yeah.
Hey,
So-
also we have a special because this is over Easter weekend, right? We have a very
Right.
special musical thing that's going to go on with harps and Native American flutes and all kinds of stuff. It's going to be awesome. It's going to be Friday night. We have 80 speakers, over 130 classes. I think it's about $70 to get in for 3 days. And
Wow.
anyway, it is the biggest Book of Mormon event in the world. Come and join us. It's going to be phenomenal.
Yes, please do. Okay. Thank you so much, Rod, for coming on. We're obviously going to have you. There's so much more to talk about. We got hours and hours of things that we need to cover, but I appreciate you taking the time to come on Zion Media, share your wisdom, your insights, all this work that you've done to help bring people to Christ. Yeah, and it's awesome. So
The Book of
thank you for
Mormon
coming.
is the tool to bring people back to Christ. It is by far the way. I can't think of anything I could be more excited about, and than letting people know the truthfulness of the Book of Mormon. It's not only is it a doctrinal, amazing book, it's also a real history of real people and real places and real events. And these things really did in fact occur, and we can actually show it. We got more evidence for the Book of Mormon now. I don't know. It's a big statement, but the Bible has a ton of evidence for it. We have a ton of evidence for this now as well.
Let's go.
Thank you for letting us share some information with you guys. Appreciate that.
Amen. And
David and Trevor, thank you.
you're welcome. Thanks, Rod. And as you guys know, I love the Book of Mormon. It's my favorite book on the planet. I am in that book every single day, and I'm so grateful for it. So for myself, I'm Shane Baldwin. For Trevor the Key Keys, David the Lion Douglas, and our very esteemed Rod Meldrum. We'll see you guys all next time.